So, a very good morning to you all. Welcome along to my final session of the week. And we're talking security today, my favorite topic. And the nice thing about this particular topic is they've been very gracious because I'm not selling anything. Well, apart from my books, of course. But that's another story. So this is going underground. So we're going to be talking about discovering, exploiting, and defending against covert channels in modern computing. And what the heck is all that about? I can't tell you how many people come to me and they say, Andy, I love this security game. How do you get into it? How do we get started? And I thought, well, if I'm going to do a session here at Microsoft Ignite, let's do a session of education. So this is very much an education session, all right? So again, if you're an expert, fantastic. If you're a novice, then you're going to love this. There's something for everybody here, I hope. So who am I? If you've not met me before, my name is Andy Malone. I'm an MVP in security, cloud and data center for 12 years now. I'm also a Microsoft trainer for 21 years. I'm from a little place called Stirling in Scotland, home of William Wallace, and also it's where they filmed Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And, woohoo, yes, and it's also home to a little castle that you may know as Winterfell in Game of Thrones. So, there you go. So that's just a little bit about me. Okay, so this particular session we're going to talk about covert channels in modern computing. And to be honest, covert channels are really nothing new. They've been around a long time, but it's very important as security professionals, as IT professionals, that we know what these things are and how they work and also how to defend against them. So we're going to be talking about all the different types of covert channels. So we're going to talk about where they're used, who uses them, in which situations. You'll find it's not just the NSA or the military. A lot of this has been embedded in computing, and not just Windows, in Apple, in various devices throughout time. So I hope you find the session useful and educational, as they say. So, first of all, knowing is everything, as they say. So what is a covert channel? A covert channel is essentially a type of computer security attack that creates the capability to transfer information objects between processes that are not supposed to be allowed to communicate within the organization's computer security policy. That sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? But what does it really mean? So, of course, when we talk about security, I want you to remember this. If you leave here with nothing today, remember this. There are two rules for security, okay? Okay, number one, never give out all the information. That's it, okay? There is no number two. Okay. Okay. You're a bit slow there. It's a Friday. You were out at Universal last night. Okay, I was stuck on the Kong ride for an hour, but that's another story. Okay, so what are covert channels then? Essentially, they allow multiple parties to communicate stealthily. They hide the fact, and this is one of the most important aspects, they hide the fact that communication is even taking place. Okay, and this is a key thing. It ensures privacy within communications, but unlike encryption, so if you're using encryption like SSL or EAP TLS or all of those things, you can actually tell that communication is taking place. Whereas by using a covert channel, you wouldn't even know that we're communicating. That's the difference between this, all right? Because encryption, of course, is easily identified. You can use tools like Fiddler, and you can perform a kind of man-in-the-middle attack. You can see what's going on. You can see the communications actually taking place. Again, clear and visible indications of encryption are going on, as I say. So essentially what we have on the right-hand side are what we use every day in our jobs. So overt channels, they're known, they're expected, they've been authorized, they've been authenticated on your network. They're probably being monitored by the various security tools out there as well. They've been well designed and they're well controlled. So all of these are overt channels, whereas unknown channels on the other side, covert channels, these are unknown. These are unexpected forms of communications In many cases, they may even be unauthorized or uncontrolled. So the real goal here is really kind of attempting to bypass any kind of detection. So who might use this? Well, there are a number of reasons why you might use this technology. Military organizations may use this. For example, you want to get that message across, you may send a raven or however you want to do it. But the fact is that communication, you must not know that communication is taking place. But you might think, okay, Andy, this all sounds good, but is this anything new? Of course it's nothing new. We've had this for centuries. So whether it was invisible ink, I'm sure we had those invisible ink pens when we were kids, remember, in the lights. Wax tablets, microdots. Back in the Egyptian era, they used to shave the heads of slaves with secret messages and so on. Also messages hidden in hunted animals. They would bury secret messages within the skin of a carcass of an animal and so on. So it's really kind of nothing new. So why do we need covert channels? There are a number of reasons, and what's the main reason why they work? Mainly because of the deficiencies in us, human beings. So I'm sure you're aware that animals, dogs and various animals have superior hearing to us, superior smell to us. Many animals have superior eyesight to human beings. And it's those deficiencies in our makeup, if you will, that makes covert channels really, really popular. Also, a lack of interest. You assume that just because you can't see something, it's not affecting you. So, for example, I could be an international terrorist. Like that could happen. I could be an international terrorist, work with me here, and I could have a website called flowers.com. I might use some stenography. I might post pictures of a nice bunch of daffodils or something, and I post this once a week, and embedded within that is a secret message. So, if you don't know that it's there, then you wouldn't particularly go looking for it. Also, the system design discrepancies as well. So a lot of modern computer systems, certainly in the early days, they didn't look for these things. So, for example, slack space on disks, even today, things like virtual private networks, these are all examples of how we can bypass normal or overt forms of communication. So then we think, okay, how big is the threat, Andy? So this particular threat, how big is it? Well, I mean, if you go on and do a search for tools, there are 600 plus tools out there. So irrespective of whether you're using a mobile device or whether you're using Windows, iOS, or any of those devices, there's a whole bunch of tools out there. And it's not really about the device, it's really about the technology and what it can do. So, for example, there's graphics editors, there's audio editors. You can do packet insertion into manipulate text into video. You can insert text messages into videos. You can insert audio messages into videos. I'm sure when we were kids, there was those records. When you play a record backwards, you got a different message. Remember those? So, that was kind of cool. So we've got text generators, and again, it's multiple operating systems. So there's no one operating system to blame here. So 600 plus tools available, and then you start to think, okay, how big is that threat? So as we know, as security professionals, a lot of these tools are so easy to get. So as I said the other day, to be a hacker, you don't need to be able to put a satellite into geosynchronous orbit. You don't need to be a PowerShell expert. You could be a 10-year-old and download these really, really simple tools, okay? And that's the danger of these things. So the threat is real out there. So Tor, for example, a few years ago, in fact, if you look on my Twitter page is at Andy Malone. If you look on there, there's a link to my MSDN videos of the various sessions I've done over the years. I did a deep dive into the dark web. It was called the Dark Web Rises a few years ago on the Tor, the Onion router, and exactly how it works and what it does. I'll be kind of doing a little bit of that today as well. Stenography, of course, pictures, video, audio, inserting secret messages, audio manipulation. So I'm sure that you've all seen that famous video on YouTube at the moment, how Barack Obama, he said a speech, and they changed the speech using voice recognition, and his mouth was moving or synchronized perfectly with this speech. Something that he didn't even say. It was brilliant. Okay? So really clever. We've got apps for hiding our location. So if you've got an Android device or a Windows or an Apple device, you can now get geolocation hiding. So when you post on your Facebook that you're here in Orlando, you might not be. You might be at home in Stirling or in Norway or wherever you may need to be. Okay? Okay, so we can hide our geolocation. We can also, there are a plethora of apps for sending secret messages now. So we're in an age of maybe government surveillance. I better not say too much here, by the way, because I'm going through the airport today. I don't want to be rubber gloved. So, but we do live in an era of surveillance. And again, we can't get away from that. It's just the nature of the technology and our lives. So knowing that, if I want to communicate, if I want to avoid being monitored by authorities, what are my options? How can I do that? So they're just some of the options. And so the threat is, as it says, really quite big. And then you have to start thinking, well, okay, Andy, if these tools exist out there, what's some of the damage that we could physically do? And your mind just boggles with that. So as I said, you could be a terrorist. You could be posting pictures on a flowers website, flowers.com. It could be anything. You could be uploading music tracks or movies. I never do that, by the way. You could be downloading movies that have got secret messages contained within them, and you wouldn't even see them coming. Okay? You've even got tools like Project Voco. This is the new voice manipulation software from Adobe. So I can record your voice for about 10 minutes, and I can basically play your voice back and basically type something, and it will say it. And it sounds really realistic. And in fact, the National Security Agency here in the US have actually looked at that product and they've said, hold on, Adobe, you maybe want to hold off releasing that. It could be a little bit dangerous. So again, we need to work out how to watermark that. So the damage that could be done could be quite substantial if you think about it. So what are these different types of covert channels that we're talking about? So there's a whole family of channels here. Steganography. We talk about network channels. There's text manipulation tools within operating system like Windows. Data appending. So there's a whole family of these different tools. So let's talk about each of these. So steganography, of course, it's been out there a long time. You can essentially take an image, a video, an audio track, and you can embed a text file within that, a secret message within it. Again, if you were specifically looking for that message, you wouldn't know that it was there. Network traffic. So, of course, we all communicate by TCP/IP. TCP/IP has been around a long time, almost 40 years now. TCP/IP has been around. And as I said yesterday in my other session, I view TCP/IP or modern computing like those green boards that we used to have as kids in Lego. Remember the Lego boards? So that's your basic network. And all we've been doing through the years is we've been building security on top of that. And the problem is that a lot of these hacking tools that we still have today, the problem that they still work is because you can get underneath the board. And again, I don't know what the answer is. I don't think there's anybody to blame for that. So we've got that. Text manipulation, as I say. You can also do data hiding. So there are lots of different tools to do data hiding. You can hide data, of course, in encrypted files. You can hide data in alternate data streams, for example, in Windows 10. You've got data appending, things like end of frame, headers, footers, and so on. So you can hide, there's lots of different places to hide content, hide information, hide potentially malicious code in what looks like a fairly benign type of file. So what I've got is, I've got a very early example. And I'm going to show you, it's a very old video. This was from the Vietnam War era. And this guy is called Jeremiah Denton, very, very famous. But just look at this video. Got some audio?
I get adequate food and adequate clothing and medical care when I require it.
How do you think about what's so-called definite law? What do you think that's about?
Well, I don't know what is happening, but whatever the position of my government is, I support it fully. Whatever the position of my government is, I believe in it. Yes, sir. I am a member of that government.
What was happening there? Did you notice? Morse code. Do you know what he was Morse coding? He was Morse coding the word torture. Yes? So that is an example of covert communication. And that's how he got the message out that he was being tortured. Okay. Now, modern tools. Now, this is a version, this is an anonymous version of Linux. So whether you use Kali Linux, whether you use a lot of these kind of hacking tools, this is just an example of a distro that contains lots of anonymizing kind of tools. Please note that anything that you do or play with or damage, it's got nothing to do with this conference or me. So, you know, just a little kind of heads up on that. If you do any danger, don't start sending me the bills. Okay, so just be aware of that. So, covert channels then. Let's talk a little bit about one of my favorites. It's an old one, but I still think it's pretty interesting. This is steganography. And it's amazing. It's old, but it really works. It really works, and it's a well-known tactic today. For example, a number of terrorists, a number of criminal organizations still use this technology. So essentially, steganography has two parts. We have the carrier, so the carrier file, and so this might be a photo, it might be an audio file, it might be a video. We have the payload, so the information essentially that what you want to put into it. Now, modern steganography has come along an awful long way. And again, the example that I'm going to show you, that you can get paid versions of the software, which are incredibly good, and they don't change, for example, the file size. So if you were running it through a file size editor, you wouldn't see the difference in file size. The only way to view the differences would be like a hash file or a hash signature. A good little thing that you may want to download for Windows, by the way, just to detect changes in files. There's a great little utility called HashTab. I don't know if you've seen that. HashTab. So just download it, and what that does, it adds an additional tab into Windows. So when you right-click and choose properties in a file, you can see the hash signature. So it's very nice. Again, there's a whole bunch of tools, as I said. Essentially what it does, on the left there, you're going to start with your basic message. You're going to run it through an encrypted algorithm, and basically it will embed your secret message into the file. Again, some of the newer encryption tools, you can encrypt that document as well, and you can do multiple encryptions. So again, the receiver just picks up the picture, looks at the movie, looks at the audio file, or hears the audio file. They wouldn't even know that anything was in there. Another form is something called digital watermarking. And I'm often asked, well, Andy, how does steganography differ from digital watermarking? Well, digital watermarking, in fact, I demoed this the other day. So if you've got things like Microsoft Word, and obviously we're all a little bit wary about sharing content, you might put a digital watermark into your Word document. And the thing is, you can see that. Whereas with this method, steganography, you wouldn't even see it. You wouldn't notice it. So watermarking essentially extends the file with extra information, whereas stenography, the idea is it must never be apparent to the viewer that it's actually being done. There's a whole bunch of tools. Here's the tools here. You can play with these tools. You can download them. Many of them are free. Go ahead and play with them. You know, kids love this stuff, but watch out for your teenage daughters. You want to make sure that you know what they're doing. So what I want to do is I want to show you a stenography demo. So I've got a Windows 10 machine here, and I'm going to flip over into here, and I've got a photo. So here is a picture of a secret message. So there's my little secret message. And I'm going to take a photo of myself. There I am doing a security event. So that's the two files. So that's the payload file and also the message as well. So I'm going to just use this very simple tool called steghide. And the first thing that we do is we simply load up the file. So I'm going to go into my demo. I'm going to select my photo, and I'm going to click on OK. I'm then going to choose the embedded file. Again, in this case, it's my text file. And what I now need to do is I just need to give the file or the output file a name. So I'm just going to call this just demo 1. Okay. And then I'm going to click. Now, you can choose the algorithm that you want. Please note, it doesn't just use US algorithms, but also Russian and Chinese and Japanese as well. I'm going to put in a password in there as too. Okay, so I've now done that, and I'm going to embed that file. So you can see there's the file, there's the copy, looks exactly the same. You would never know. Okay, so I just post that on my terrorist website, and you would be none the wiser. So obviously the receiver, and you can see if I look at the file, now this is a fairly simple file, but you can see that the file size has actually increased a couple of bytes, okay? Now, to be honest, if you didn't know that, you wouldn't be any of the wiser. So I'm going to open up the file again. So this time I'm the receiver. So I receive the file from my colleague. So I open up the file, and now what I do is I need to save the text file. So I'll just give the text file, I'll just call it result.txt. And next, I'll save it. And put in the password, of course, you would need to know that. And then we extract the message. And when I go in, you can see that, yeah, it's here. And there we go. So I can now see the secret message. All right. Now, that is, as I say, a really simple example. Okay? Some of the tools that are out there, imagine if it was a video. Imagine if it was an audio file. You wouldn't even know it was there. So from a security perspective, you need to be aware of the dangers of this stuff. And this stuff kids can use. So as a security professional, you need to be aware of this stuff. Okay, what about network channels? We're all network experts here. I'm preaching to the converted here. So I'm not going to give you a lesson in networking. We've all been in this business a long time. So we need to be able to communicate covertly. So what are our options? Well, if you think about it the most modern way, for example, getting that message out, being able to download that favorite movie, being able to access Netflix from a different country or whatever, what are you going to use? You're going to use a VPN, yes? So a piggyback type of thing. So it fools the networking to thinking that you are somewhere where you're not. And that's just one kind of method. And a lot of people say, well, Andy, if we're going to do that, why don't we just encrypt the content? And the reason is because encryption, well, to be honest, in many countries, encryption is actually banned. Again, you could lose your hand or your head, even worse. So it could be banned, it could be outlawed. Key escrow may be in use. So it's well known here that all the cryptographic tools that we use in the United States, all the cryptographic tools that we use in Western Europe, everywhere, conform to a standard called NSA Suite B level encryption. It's a fact, okay? Now, what does that basically mean? You can go back to the 1977. Remember when IBM first deployed their AS400 mainframes and their original PCs? By the way, anybody remember 1977 here? Raise your hand if you remember the original Star Wars. Did anybody go and see Star Wars? Okay, I've got real respect for you. There you go. Okay. So, that time, of course, IBM produced the very, very first PCs, the very first communication. And the very first cryptographic algorithm that they used was something called DES, yes? The Data Encryption Standard. Yes, I'm sure we've all heard of it. And at that time, basically, of course, when it was released, some of the government bigwigs, they looked at it and they go, maybe we should look after this for you, okay? And essentially, that's what's happened since then. So we now have an organization in the US called NIST, the North American Standards Institute. And this is to make sure that we have good quality encryption. Yes? Okay? Good quality, okay? Don't let me tell you who NIST is associated with, but that's another story. You know, I'm never going to get out of this country alive, am I? You know? You know, I'm going to have to run around like this at the airport. Hello, I'd like to check in, please. And there's somebody going to be at the back going, he won't stand still. So, US, UK government, okay. Also, encryption. Well, it might raise too many eyebrows. So, for example, think about it. You go to the airport. Who's been to the airport recently for some extended security screening? Come this way, sir. Yes? Well, if you've been to the airport recently, you know that many organizations, they want you to open up your laptop. They want you to open and switch on your laptop, and they want to see it. In many countries in the world, if they detect that you've got encryption and you refuse to open up the laptop, what's going to happen? Okay? You're going to sail away and never be seen again with a free vacation at Guantanamo Bay. Yes? No, seriously. In the UK, for example, refusal to open up a laptop that's encrypted will give you 2 years in jail. Seriously. Yes? And I suspect the US, it's probably like 50 years. So you guys are not generous with your criminal justice system. Okay, so you could be thrown in jail. Also, key escrow, as I say, well, we all know that Windows Server and Windows, we know BitLocker, yes? So BitLocker encryption, it's been out there a while. What's the key thing about BitLocker? Key thing about BitLocker is if you've got an encrypted drive and you don't have a TPM, I'm not just talking about BitLocker actually, but any encryption. If it's a Mac, so Mac OS encryption. If you don't have a TPM, then it's possible for me, using a forensics tool, just to rip the recovery key, because there's always going to be a recovery key, yes? Now, if you do have a TPM and you've got a corporate laptop, what's the employer going to use? Yes, what they're going to use, what's that? The BitLocker administration module, yes? MBAM, that's right, yes? mbalm. And where does mbalm put the TPM, the recovery key? Stores it in Active Directory for the user. In other words, key escrow. Yes? So again, you may want to avoid that kind of communication, and this can obviously do that. So encryption, there's kind of a real reason to do that. Now, when we talk about who's listening in, who is listening in? Who's listening in? So obviously, you've got the casual observer. So the casual observer, again, let's say, for example, a tool like Prism. Prism, you know Ed Snowden. So every call you make, every text you do, every email you send is filtered. You know this. Come on, I'm not preaching to the unknown here. Yes? So every communication, every time you type in a search engine, every time you speak on the phone, it filters keywords. It looks for specific keywords. So if you say terrorist, for example, or nuclear, or I want to go on vacation to North Korea, or something like that, it would pick it up, right? Okay, and again, you would then get some interest paid to you. But the fact is, it's watching everybody. It's an automated system, and it's only looking for keywords. Yes? I mean, I'm not telling you things that you don't know here. Now, obviously, it's a different story if I actually detect you. So if I see who you are, then a dedicated observer, you're going to be a whole new issue. So again, I'm looking for specifically at you for a reason. So maybe you're a criminal. Maybe you're a bad guy. I'm not saying you are a bad guy, by the way, by looking at you. So, are you a bad guy? Are you a person of interest, of somebody that I should be looking at? So again, who is listening to us really depends on who we are. I got to be honest with you. Don't be afraid of all of this stuff. The chances are, to be quite honestly, you're really just not that interesting. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. We're really not that interesting, most of us, which is good, right? Which is good. How then the question is, okay, how covert do we really need to be in what we do? Okay, so again, we look at the network analysis, we look at the traffic, and if it's analyzed, the difference between covert and overt network traffic is that covert channel, you wouldn't even know that communication is taking place. Okay? So there are some military algorithms out there. There are some pieces of military equipment out there that you wouldn't even know that communication is taking place. Okay? Again, there's also there's tools that you can put on your network, for example. And I mentioned Tor, the onion router. You can put devices on your network. In fact, what is it called? It's called Skype Morph. Yes? There's a tool called Skype Morph. And basically, you can attach this to your home router. And whenever you go on Tor, yes, if there was anybody monitoring you, the traffic would look like a Skype call. Yes? Oh. He's over there going, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to take a note of that one. Okay. So the other thing is then you can be truly covert. So semi-covert is it's just going to fool the casual observer. All right? So if it examined, nothing appears unusual, but if you did a deep inspection of the packet or a deep inspection of the content, then nothing would seem out of the ordinary. Whereas if it's truly covert, then of course, nothing is getting away. Okay. Covert networking channels then. All network protocols contain headers. We know this. Each header contains a number of fields. Some of those fields can be used to store and transmit data. Many of these, however, are used for normal communications. But the most useful things is some of these headers are of a fixed packet size. And the fact is you can hide secret content within these fields, and thus when you're transmitting, nothing appears out of the ordinary. And again, the less likelihood of somebody picking you up. So some of these, for example, packet timing, storage, for example, in headers. We're going to look at all of these in a moment. How about the information hidden in a packet payload? Steganography, for example, transmitted over a secure network channel. How's that going to look? So when we start looking at the actual TCP/IP packet itself, well, we know. We've seen all this before, guys, right? So we know that we've got the broken up into 64 bytes. We've got an IP header. We've got the TCP header there. And, of course, then we've got our data. And this is obviously well known. So TCP headers obviously can serve as a carrier for covert channels. So the headers are obviously going to be very, very interesting to us. Now, again, if you've seen things like the advanced threat protection, advanced threat analytics, some of these deep inspection firewalls, this is what they're designed to do. They're designed to look at these packets that are coming in that are trying to perhaps masquerade themselves as something that they're not. So when we look at here where to hide data. So if I was a bad guy and I was doing some data hiding here, then there are a number of interesting fields here. So for example, the identification, the flags, the fragment offset field, all of these can be used to send and transmit covert data. In a TCP header, of course, we know that every header has a unique sequence number. And when a header is, or when a packet is transmitted out onto the wire, it's just basically flung out onto the wire, and it's reassembled at the other end, and it's the sequence number. That's the interesting part. Also, another area that you can hide, so this is good for you guys for security, a timestamp. These are all fixed-sized fields where we potentially could hide secret or sensitive information. What about storage-based then? Storage-based. So information embedded within a packet. So for example, it might be the IP identification, the offset, the options, those are the TCP options, the IP options, and so on. The checksum, the sequence numbers, all of these could be used to hide interesting content. Timing channels. So information there, as it says, is hidden by triggering or delaying events to happen at a specific time. So again, there are a number of documented types of attacks that would do this. So we can see an example here. We've got Bob and Alice. So Bob and Alice, Bob sends a covert message. He sends it over obviously the IP network, and you can see here that you can monitor the traffic, potentially manipulate that traffic, manipulate the packet of traffic, so that when the traffic comes into Alice, it looks benign, it looks like it hasn't been amended because the content's still the same, but again, it could be dangerous because it's been manipulated. Again, a classic IPv6 or an IPv4 man-in-the-middle attack could do this, for example. So how do we detect these things then? So each operating system, of course, has their own tools. There's many, many tools that you can use to detect these fields. So again, can be used to identify anomalies, and that's really what we're looking for, anomaly analysis. So ATA, for example, advanced threat analytics. It looks for packets that just doesn't look right, doesn't feel right. So you might have, for example, an IPS, an intrusion prevention, an intrusion detection system. There's a number of tests that you can use, of course, but again, as a security professional, you need to have a good grounding in IP and understand its architecture and how content can flow within it. So what about the other covert channels then? Okay, what are my other options that I can use? So again, if I go to ICMP, for example, well documented. Okay, so of course, the Ethernet header, the IP header, the ICMP header, and user data. So ICMP essentially ping, of course, we all know this, 127.0.0.1. What we're looking for here is the path maximum transmission unit. Again, we could potentially manipulate this packet, and again, on any firewall worth their salt. This is one of the reasons why we block this type of packet, because it's a classic delivery for things like denial of service. And many of us would know this already. Some other things then. What about DNS? So, of course, if I'm a hacker, there are many network ports open on your network that are common network ports. You know, port 80, port 443, port 53 for DNS, for example. Port 53 has to be open. So because it has to be open, it's a perfect delivery system for potentially malicious code. Again, you can see some of these tools, DNS, Stegosaurus, for example. It can hold arbitrary text in its various fields. It could potentially hold malicious code. The other thing, the downside of DNS, is it's got an incredibly high bandwidth as well, typically up to 220 bytes per request. So potentially, it could do quite a lot of damage. Often used for SSH and also streaming audio, but the key thing here is it's essentially unfiltered by firewalls. Okay, how do we resolve this then? Well, a good way to resolve it, these are some solutions. DNSSEC, of course, DNS security, you can do that. So again, when the packets travel over the network, do you have the right to communicate here? Do we have the right to transmit, and so on? IPsec, of course, the negotiation protocol. Remember, IPsec is negotiable on IPv4. On IPv6, it's included by default. So IPv6 is a much better way to transmit. You could deploy an intrusion prevention detection system, as I mentioned. You've got tools like ATA, but the key thing is, guys, you need to manage it and you need to monitor it. So DNS could potentially be a backdoor into kind of your system. Excuse me. Another type of stealthy computing, onion routing. Okay, onion routing has been around a few years. Just a word of warning here. If you download this tool, immediately you download it, your IP address is monitored. Okay, so my recommendation is, if you're going to download it from a public location. All right. So what is onion routing? Onion routing, very, very clever, actually designed by the US Navy a number of years ago. And the idea was that the Tor network, the idea of it was to give freedom a voice. So as I've mentioned, there are a number of countries in the world, a number of places in the world where web access may be restricted, where freedom of speech may be restricted. And what this was designed to do, it was designed to not just mask communication, but also mask where communication was coming from and going to. So here we can see a multi-layer onion. And the idea is that if I was monitoring your network, first of all, it looks like you're communicating from somewhere else. And the thing about it, the communication, you can see because it's multiple layer, each layer is encrypted and it's got a unique temporary digital certificate. So it's got a temporary digital certificate. So even if I got through to the first layer, I can only see through to the next layer and the previous layer. You can't see the destination. So if I was monitoring your network, it's incredibly difficult to obviously find out where that piece of data is going. So basically how it works, we've got Bob and Alice here. And essentially, each onion router basically maintains a TLS AES connection to every other onion route. And the thing is, every time you open a connection, it's random. So there is no kind of, you can't guarantee that it's going to go through one way. So again, in this example, users run the software called an onion proxy. So you can either be an onion, you can either be a client, or you can actually join the network as a router as well, by the way. This is completely open source. So each onion route basically maintains a long and a short-term identity, typically around 10 minutes. So even if I was listening in on your network, even if I was monitoring it, eventually that channel will be torn down. On top of that, the user can actually manually tear that channel down and recreate a new identity and a new channel at any time. Okay, these are used to sign the certificates, which sign the router's description, the summary, keys, address, bandwidth, and so on. So here we can see Alice and Dave, and Alice wants to communicate with Jane on the far side, or Bob on the far side. So basically, she fires up her browser, and again, the directory server will then say, hey, here's some potential routes, and then a route is generated, okay, through the network. So if I was listening in on her communication, I'm just thinking about where could I possibly listen to her? If I knew that Alice was a bad person, I would probably listen at the source. If I knew that Bob was a bad person, I could listen at his source. But the fact is that while they're communicating, actually finding them is incredibly difficult. Okay? Now, I could do various types of monitoring. If I suspected, I could maybe drop a piece of malicious code on her machine to monitor her and so on. But that's the thing. If you know that they're a bad person, that's the only way to basically monitor them. So during the transmission, it's very difficult. Again, if she disconnects that transmission and then reconnects it, you'll notice that the route is completely different. So every single time she communicates, it's totally different. And this is what makes this method very powerful and very popular. Okay. So the routing is comprised of 3 elements. We have something called a control cell. This basically interprets the nodes. We've got a relay cell, which carry the end-to-end stream data. And also, we've got the relay cells, as I said, you can see here, it has an additional header. That additional header contains the stream ID. It contains an integrity checksum, but also the length of the payload as well. So the fixed cells, they're typically 512 bytes in size. And if you think, okay, could we just do a denial of service attack on this? No, because it's got some very clever mechanisms to defend against that. So what I want to do is I'm just going to come out of this. And I'm using a Mac, apologies, but it doesn't really matter, it's all the same. I'm going to go into here, and let's just go into my browser. So this particular, again, as a security professional, you need to know about this particular tool, because if you don't know about it, how can you defend against it, right? So I'm going to open up, this is the Tor browser. It's a free service. You can sign up to it. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Oops, there's a new version of it. Okay, I'll do that later. And I can search for anything here. So, for example, if I wanted to search for a dark website, for example, I might search for the hidden wiki. Okay? So if I search for the hidden wiki, now you'll notice it takes a little bit longer. It's because of all the kind of the cross traffic and the channels and things. Okay, so it's using a different browser. So this is using a browser or a search engine called DuckDuckGo. And you can see here it's saying, where is the hidden wiki? Well, the thing about the hidden wiki is its name and IP address and details are constantly changing. So what I'm looking for is something that's got a .onion extension, because this tells me that it's actually a hidden website. So, okay, let me just go in here, the real hidden wiki. Most of these are just kind of pointers. Okay, you can see though that browsing does take a little bit longer because it's doing a lot of hops through the secure channels. And let me just zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so these are not real. Okay, so you can see that this particular website here has a .onion extension. So there is a possibility that this could be its location today. Again, for your own reasons, I do not endorse the use of this. Be very careful when you go to these types of websites. You have been warned. Okay, yeah, so you can see here, okay, introduction points. Yeah. Okay, so these are all kind of hidden kind of sites. A lot of these this is a proxy into the dark web. But again, this is also a hidden, this is not the hidden wiki, but this is an Onion website. So you can see here hosting services, if you want to buy, stolen credit cards, guns, drugs, or whatever, all the good stuff on a Saturday night. Okay. That's just a regular Saturday night for some people, huh? Okay, so now, one key thing then. So that's the Onion router. Oops, sorry, just go back into that. Okay. Now, one thing, let me just pull this over a little bit. Actually, tell you what I'm going to do, just stay in there. Now, you'll notice up here, if I just zoom in here, that there is a little drop-down arrow, an onion. And at any point, I can just click onto that, and it will just completely generate a brand new identity for me. So if there was anybody monitoring me at that point, instantly, I've got a brand new identity. Now, the other thing, what if your network is monitoring you? So the other thing that you can do is not just gain a new identity, but you can also generate a new Tor circuit. So as I mentioned, so when Alice disconnects, she can just generate a totally brand new circuit. You'll notice it doesn't close down the browser, okay? So it just flips over to another circuit. And you can keep doing that. So if there was anybody monitoring you, it would be very difficult to actually be traced. Now, another thing about this, by the way, just a little word of warning. Andy, if I was law enforcement, because I've done law enforcement work, by the way. So from the other flip side, how do we detect this? How do we detect that somebody's using Tor? Well, obviously, you would drop code onto their machines. You would monitor their machines at the source. Another way that you could monitor them is a lot of people go on here and they download illicit content, like, I don't know, pornography, videos, whatever, yes? And they may use, for example, a torrent, yes? So if you're using torrents to download stuff. Now, the thing is, torrents do not use this secure channel, so I would have you there. I could still monitor torrents. If you downloaded a Word document or a file, and you opened it in Word, again, I could monitor you there. So if you want to be totally benign, if you will, because if you think about it, I've opened the browser on this machine, but if you look at this machine, there's an awful lot more going on here, right? Whereas there's a little distro called Tails that you can download, and you can put it on a USB stick, and you can boot up from that, and it's completely clear. So there's nothing else on that. That would be true anonymous, yes? But if you use like a Tor browser on a regular computer, there's an awful lot of other communications going on. So for example, Windows updates, potentially. It's still monitoring those channels. So potentially, you could be monitored. So just be aware of that, all right? One other thing, just interesting, the industry is fighting back. So there are things like checkpoint firewall, for example. I'm going to block Tor traffic. I'm going to detect Tor traffic. I'm going to block it. But Tor is fighting back, okay? Because obviously, if I need freedom, I'm trying to get my message out there to the people. How can I get that message out? So, as I say, the browser is starting to fight back. And one of those things here is if you go into security in fact, Tor network settings here, one of the options that you have here is my ISP blocks the traffic. So if your ISP blocks Tor traffic, you can click on that and you can now actually choose a bridge. Yes, so there are a number of bridges that you can use, and that will then connect you to the Tor network, and therefore bypassing your ISP, okay? You know I'm never going to work at this conference again for saying that, but there we go. Okay, but as a security person, you guys need to know about this stuff, you see? It's important. You need to know it's out there. So if I was in a college or a school, and I saw this on one of the kids' machines, I would be greatly concerned, okay? If you were in a company, you might want to add this to your corporate terms and conditions, yes? An acceptable use policy. You know, if you're caught with a machine that's got this technology on it, you've got a good chance of losing your job, right? So just be aware of that. It's a great tool, but again, potentially very, very dangerous. So, as I said, the onion router. Other ways to block it. So again, so at the moment, the industry is going through a number of ways to block it. You know, it even tells you how to block it. So if you go to the website itself, it gives you a list of the routers. Yes, and you can actually block those routers on your firewall if you want to do that. Checkpoint Firewall also blocks it. So if you're going to use a firewall, it needs to be able to detect and analyze this type of traffic. Now, as I mentioned, though, it's fighting back. Okay, so Tor is fighting back, and you just saw there in my little demo in the browser how it can fight back. But there are also tools and utilities that you can get as well. So for example, OBS proxy. OBS proxy, you can see, this is without using it. This is a free download. It basically adds it onto Tor. So this is Tor traffic running, but when you run it through OBS proxy, it just looks like regular traffic. Okay? Again, making network detection very difficult. Okay. So, just a little bit about network channels. Okay, so up next, I'm going to talk about text manipulation. So text manipulation, as I say, changing text, things like file signatures, text editors, text hiding techniques, and cryptography. So there are a whole bunch of different methods, of course. Some of those I kind of showed you earlier. What about the actual operating systems themselves? This is well documented. And again, if you've never had a chance to play with this, it's very interesting. Alternate data streams. So alternate data streams, these were an original feature of the NTFS file system many years ago. And the NTFS has something called alternate data streams. And as it says here on the slide, it's got the ability to fork data into an existing file, into an existing output without affecting its original file size. So if you're just browsing for the file size, you'll never see it. So for example, in the early years, vendors like Dell and HP, for example, they would often put utilities within the file system, hidden as alternate data streams. Likewise, bad guys using malicious code could also use this as well. And if you want to view this, if you go into a hex editor, so just download any hex editor, have a look at your C drive, and there is a C drive, there's a folder there called $data. And if you look in $data, it's got a memory address of 80 to 80, and you can see that's typically where alternate data streams live. So one of my passions for security is digital forensics, and this is one of the first places that I would look. So seriously, get a hex editor, have a look, it's fascinating, okay? So files themselves can actually have multiple alternate data streams. Windows Explorer, of course, of course, NTFS, the NTFS file system came from the Mac file system originally. There's a number of different OSs that have this kind of similar kind of file system. So again, this is not just Windows. Most of the OSs have something similar to this. So again, megabyte. So the key thing here is, right, megabytes. We're not just talking about, a few K of data. Megabytes of data can be hidden within a data stream. So potentially malicious code could be a boot sector virus and things like that could be very dangerous. And it's incredibly simple to do. So for example here, I open up Notepad and I type in Andy. I created a text file called Andy. And I type in andy.txt and then pipe that into Andy's hidden text. So this allows Andy's hidden text to be an alternate data stream. So when I now do dir, I now just see nothing. So there's nothing there. Okay? So again, that's just a very, very simple example just with a few K. But if you can imagine a very large file, it would say no, it doesn't take any space. So notice that there's no indication of Andy's hidden text, okay? And again, I've saved a message, it's got text, but it's not using any of the disk space. How can I view this? Great question, sir, thank you. So, of course, embedded text editing is nothing new. It's been around a long time. So you can use Notepad, and again, what I've done in this slide, there's a little example of a big text file that you can actually use as that text file that I just mentioned. You can try this later yourself. I'll, there's notes, various notes on these slides. Alternate data streams, data hiding then is very common within an operating system. So again, Mark Russinovich, his sysinternals tool, he had a great little tool called Streams. So if you've used Streams, that's a great tool to view the various streams. Again, in Windows, you can, there's various switches that you can now view these, and for example, in Windows 10. So alternate data streams, so here's another utility here. So files with alternate streams of data could also be, this is the dangerous part, they could be encapsulated into data packets to carry malicious code over a network. Again, they will not show up on listings. And again, the file size doesn't show any difference. But also, because of this, this is where file signatures also have a problem. So we're all aware of file signatures and things like file hashes. So a file hash would not change because the size of the file hasn't changed. There's no difference in the file. On the subject of signatures, one of the key things as a forensics person that you need to be aware of is file signatures. Not just for identifying files on a physical disk, but also if you're doing network analysis as well. So if you're using Wireshark, for example, you're viewing the information, you're looking for specific file signatures. So for example, if I suspected that you were a pedophile or you've stolen some important documents, I might be interested in all the JPEG files. Now the thing is, you might try and, for example, hide or rename a JPEG file or change the extension, but it doesn't necessarily change the signature of the file. So you can see in this example here, an executable file actually has a signature of 4C5A9A. And you see it's got the signature of MZ up there. Likewise, every single file type has a file signature. So for example, a JPEG file, it's got JFIF, yes? Common files such as DLL files. And what I've done in these few slides is I've just put a few different options, things like an AVI here, a zip file, for example. So if you're interested in security, definitely have a look at the different file signatures. Now, of course, you don't need to be a hex expert, but do be aware of the different signatures themselves. So looking at data appending, the other thing that we've got here then, of course, is disks. And we all use hard drives of one form or another. And again, depending on the hard drive, depending on the actual technology that you're using, many hard drives have what we call slack space. Again, you can look at the file size or the disk size, the amount of disk, and you often find that there is hidden slack space within the physical disk as well. So again, you have to watch out for that because it could cause issues. So things like if you're doing multiple partitions, and let's face it, some of the disks that we have today are incredibly large, and thus it's possible to hide some of these features in there. And what I've done is I've just kind of, for your own kind of info, I've just put some notes in on here on how to see them and how to spot them. The other thing that I was going to say as well is, I don't know if you remember this tool, TrueCrypt. Have you heard of TrueCrypt? Yeah? Okay. So a few years ago, before kind of BitLocker became big, there was this free little utility called TrueCrypt. And you may have heard that TrueCrypt was hacked. Okay? Now, whether it has or hasn't, who knows? Okay? But let's just say that the powers that be thought that the concept of TrueCrypt was quite dangerous. Okay? So again, if you try and download TrueCrypt today, you'll get an error message if you try and run it with Windows. Okay? It's got NSA written all over it, doesn't it? But anyway, that's another story. So, of course, a number of people in the security industry have come back and they've said, yeah, okay, maybe it really was quite a good technology. But the problem with TrueCrypt and other pieces of software like it, it just used American algorithms. It used NSA Suite B algorithms. So the industry is fighting back. And there's a new version just now. It's very good. Now, I'm not putting down BitLocker. Absolutely not. Disk encryption is something you should definitely do. But if you're uploading data to the cloud, then maybe look at third-party cryptography as well. Because I would personally send encrypted files up to an encrypted cloud. So yesterday I spoke about, for example, Cryptonator. That's a great piece of encryption software. But what this does, this is slightly different than other pieces of cryptography. It creates hidden containers within containers. And you think, okay, well, that's easy. I mean, I've got a piece of software, I've got some forensic software here that could actually crack TrueCrypt. But then if you start to think about it, if I create a virtual machine, or I create a container within a hidden container. And in that hidden container, I create a virtual machine. And on the virtual machine, I create a container within a container within a container. You then start to create what we call a cryptographic onion. These things, and by using different types of encryption at different layers, it becomes very, very complex and quite difficult to encrypt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you just a very, very simple demo. So I'm just going to flip over to this demo here. And again, it looks very similar to a piece of technology that we've seen before. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a hidden volume within a hidden container. And it says, do you want to create just a volume or a hidden volume? Okay. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and create a hidden one, okay? And I'm going to click Next. So, and again, I'm going to select a file. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. So, again, I'm going to just go in here, and you can put any kind of file that you like. So I'm going to call this Game of Thrones Season... let's say 0801. Wouldn't you like to see that? Yes? Okay. And you can see, and I'm just going to make it an MP4 file. Okay, so this is a movie file. Okay, And in here, I am going to say, let's just make this, what kind of encryption do you want to use? So I'm going to use, this is the encryption algorithm of the Russian Federation. Okay, so I'm going to use that. And again, you can choose a hash value of that. So again, you can choose a different, there's multiple hash values that you can use. And size-wise, so the outer volume, I'm going to make this half a gig, so 500 megs. And I'm just going to put in a password. I'll let you see the password. Okay, so I'm going to put in password 1. Okay, so that's password 1. All right. Now, the other thing that you can also do is you can use a password file. So, for example, if you've got Queen, We Will Rock You.mp3, that's got to be on the disk before you can open the file. Now, I'm formatting the volume, and you can move the mouse around, and that will increase the sensitivity of the key. So once you've done that, I can now open that volume, and I'm opening the outer volume, and I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this my good stuff. Okay. And close that. And then click next. Okay. Right, so that's the outer volume created. Okay, so once I've done that, I can now say, hey, okay, we can now think about maybe creating the inner volume now. Okay, so this time I'm going to choose a different algorithm. So again, this is a completely different algorithm. And again, completely different SHA hash value. And again, this time I'm going to say this will be my 200. And again, for my inner volume, I'm going to use a different password. Again, you can use a different file as well to identify it. Okay, just tells me you got a weak password yet. And I'm just going to move the mouse around here. Okay, I can choose a different file system. And click on next. Just going to move this around. Okay. And then click Format. Okay. So my inner volume has been created. So again, that's it. So I've now done that. Okay. So all I need to do now is I need to mount this volume. And here's my Game of Thrones file. Again, if I went into the police department or somebody looked at this and it didn't play, you would just say, oh, I must have downloaded a dodgy copy. Sorry, officer. So I'll just put in my password. So I put in my password here. And this time I'm putting in password 2. And as password 2, of course, this is now opening the inner volume. Okay, so just mount this up. Okay, just open this file and scroll down, and there you go. And now that drive's empty. I'll create a new folder, and I will call this my really evil stuff. Okay. Okay. So, of course, now, when I go through the airport, and a police officer, if he's smart, discovers that it's got a shared volume or a secure volume, or he detects encryption, he will look at that and he will go, excuse me, the file signature of that file shows me that you said it's a JPEG file, but it looks like an encrypted file. Would you mind opening that? And of course, I go, no problem, officer. Password 1. Okay. Yes? So, anyway, as I said, I'm not going to sell you anything. It's purely about education. So, what we talked about, the covert channels. We've talked about the fact that where they're used. So very, very dangerous, potentially dangerous. And as security professionals, we really need to be aware of how these channels work. Okay. Now, did I mention I've written a book? So I've got a book called The Seventh Day. It's a science fiction thriller. It's basically Highlander meets the Da Vinci Code. And coming very soon, in about a month or so, is the sequel. It's called Shadows Rising. So watch out for that. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Malone. I really hope that you've enjoyed the conference. And please give me some feedback. We really do appreciate it. Have a fantastic time. Thank you.